The crystal chandelier above the dance floor caught the light just as the tub of rancid dishwater slammed into my shoulders. Brown grease soaked instantly into my rented collar, dripping down my chest in thick, freezing lines. The entire Gold Coast ballroom erupted into a chorus of wealthy, manicured laughter that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. I did not move. I did not scream. I simply looked through the dripping sludge at my only daughter standing across the room. She was covering her mouth with her hands, but her shoulders were shaking with undeniable amusement. She was in on the joke. I spent 35 years pulling wrenches on diesel engines for the Chicago Transit Authority. My hands are permanently scarred from slipped ratchets, and the smell of oil is baked into my skin. I know what a hard day of work feels like in my bones. I am a quiet man. I always believed that if you kept your head down, loved your family, and did your job, life would treat you with a basic level of dignity. I was wrong. The betrayal I experienced in that Chicago hotel room could happen to anyone, and it might be happening to someone you love right now. If someone dumped literal garbage on you at a wedding, you would probably lose your mind, scream, or throw a punch. I thought I would too. But in that exact second, a terrifying, absolute calm washed over my brain. I was 68 years old, a widower living in a cramped, two-room apartment in Albany Park where the radiator hissed all winter. I drove a rusted Ford Taurus that rattled when it hit 40 miles an hour. I liked my simple life. My daughter Chloe did not. Chloe had spent her entire 20s running as fast as she could from our working-class roots. She was stunning, sharp, and newly married to Julian. Julian was a junior partner at a ruthless private equity firm down in the Loop. He wore imported Italian suits that cost more than my car, and he spoke exclusively in corporate buzzwords. He looked at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered onto his pristine golf course. It was obvious. If you have ever been in a room where someone looked right through you, you know exactly how my stomach twisted. You know that cold, sinking feeling of deep invisibility. You shrink your own personality just to make them comfortable. I had been shrinking for 3 years to keep the peace. The wedding reception had been a masterclass in high society exclusion. I was seated at table 19, tucked entirely behind a massive marble pillar near the swinging kitchen doors. I was surrounded by Julian's distant, elderly aunts, who refused to make eye contact with me. I watched the affluent crowd clinking crystal champagne flutes and laughing at inside jokes. I watched my daughter glowing in a custom silk gown that I knew I could never afford. I felt a profound, heavy sadness pressing against my ribs. My wife, Elena, should have been here to see our little girl get married. She had died of pancreatic cancer a decade ago, and the grief still caught me off guard on days like this. I rubbed my worn golden wedding band. Then Julian tapped his glass with a silver spoon. The room fell into an immediate breathless hush hanging on his every word. Julian possessed that kind of commanding, arrogant presence that demanded total attention. He grabbed the microphone and smiled a bright, predatory smile at the crowd. He thanked his wealthy parents for their endless support. He thanked his fraternity brothers for flying in from the coast. He even thanked the caterers who had prepared the filet mignon. He never mentioned me. I forced a polite, trembling smile onto my face anyway. I clapped my hands together and nodded along. I told myself it was fine. It really wasn't. Now, Julian's voice echoed sharply through the high-end sound system. There is one more person we need to acknowledge tonight. I felt a sudden, foolish flutter of hope deep in my chest. Maybe Julian was saving the father of the bride for a special final toast. Julian stepped gracefully off the dais and walked slowly toward table 19. He signaled to a waiter standing nervously in the shadows. Chloe's father, Arthur, is with us tonight, Julian said smoothly. The spotlight swung wildly across the room and hit me right in the eyes. The crowd turned in their velvet chairs to stare at me. Julian snapped his fingers in the air. The waiter hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Do it," Julian commanded into the mic. The waiter lifted a plastic utility tub filled with the liquid runoff from 100 scraped dinner plates. He tipped it forward with a violent shove. The foul, freezing sludge cascaded over my head in a horrific wave. It smelled of rotting fish, stale coffee grounds, and cheap wine. It pooled heavily in my lap, soaking through to my skin. The shock was absolute. Julian leaned into the microphone, his eyes locking onto mine with pure malice. And that is exactly where the trash belongs. The room exploded into chaos. It wasn't awkward chuckling or uncomfortable murmurs. It was a roar of genuine, cruel hilarity. These people were enjoying the complete destruction of an old man. I wiped a piece of soggy brown lettuce from my cheek with a trembling hand. I looked directly at Chloe, desperate for an anchor. I expected to see horror on her face. I expected her to run to me in tears. She didn't. Chloe was giggling, leaning over to whisper something to her bridesmaid while pointing right at me. She was enjoying it. This is the part of my story that still makes my blood run cold. When the people who are supposed to protect you become the ones holding the knife, the universe flips upside down. Think about your own family for a second, and imagine the person you trust most in the world watching you get humiliated. Imagine them deciding to join the crowd, instead of standing by your side. It breaks something fundamental inside your soul that can never be fixed. I stood up slowly. The heavy, wet fabric of my cheap suit clung desperately to my legs. I didn't rush toward the exit. I didn't curse at the crowd. I walked with terrifying, deliberate slowness right up to Julian. The laughter in the room began to nervously die down as I approached the dais. People realized the old man wasn't cowering or crying. I reached out a dripping, grease-stained hand. Julian, looking slightly confused but still holding his arrogant smirk, handed me the microphone. I brought the cold metal to my lips. I scanned the sea of wealthy faces until I found Chloe's eyes. I spoke 3 quiet, devastating words. Check the trust. The shift in the room was violent and instantaneous. Julian's smug grin vanished as if it had been wiped off his face. All the blood rushed out of his cheeks, leaving him looking like a panicked ghost under the chandelier. "Wait, what?" Julian stammered, stepping forward with his hands raised. The microphone caught his terrified, breathless whisper. I simply dropped the mic onto the hardwood floor. The feedback shrieked through the speakers, making half the room cover their ears. I turned my back on them and walked out of the ballroom. I left a trail of dirty, foul-smelling water on the pristine white marble floor of the lobby. I did not look back. I was finally free. To understand why those 3 words hit Julian like a runaway freight train, I have to rewind my life 6 months. I need you to see exactly how sinister this situation really was behind closed doors. It started innocently enough on a Tuesday afternoon. My old smartphone had completely frozen, and Chloe suggested I take it to Julian's downtown office. She said they had a great corporate tech guy who could reset the hard drive for free. I took the Red Line train down to the Loop the next morning. Julian was locked in a board meeting, but his legal assistant, a sharp young woman named Maya, took my phone. Maya was warm, chatty, and genuinely kind. She offered me a cup of expensive coffee while we waited for the phone to update. While the progress bar crawled across the screen, she asked me an incredibly strange question. "Mr. Ramirez," Maya said, lowering her voice so the other cubicles couldn't hear. "Are you planning to sell your commercial properties soon? Because Julian has had me pulling property deeds all week." I frowned in total confusion. "I don't own any property, Maya. Just a month-to-month lease on a tiny apartment." Maya stopped typing on her mechanical keyboard. She looked at me with wide, worried eyes. She bit her lip nervously. She made a dangerous decision. "I really shouldn't show you this, Arthur." She turned her massive dual-monitor setup around so I could see the screen. Displayed in bright white light was a heavily researched legal dossier with my name at the top. Julian hadn't been looking at real estate for fun. Julian had been obsessively researching Illinois inheritance laws. He had been looking up the timeline for county probate courts. He had downloaded massive PDF files on how to challenge an elderly parent's mental competency to gain forced medical power of attorney. He was looking for legal loopholes to seize control of my life. My jaw physically dropped as I read the headers on the screen. Julian wasn't just a jerk with a superiority complex. He was a predator. He was actively laying the groundwork to declare me mentally unfit so he could take over my medical and financial decisions. Let me ask you a serious question right now. Have you ever discovered that someone you deeply trusted was quietly plotting against you behind your back? It is a terrifying, sickening realization. I felt the sterile office room start to spin. I asked Maya to print everything she could find. Over the next few weeks, Maya became my secret, courageous informant. She was deeply disgusted by her boss's lack of morals. She smuggled out printed emails, text message logs, and calendar invites hidden inside interoffice envelopes. The picture painted by those stolen documents was a living nightmare. Julian wasn't cartoonishly evil. He was just ruthlessly, coldly efficient. Julian had grown up poor in a bad neighborhood, clawed his way into a high-paying career, and was absolutely terrified of sliding backward. He viewed my working-class lifestyle as a contagious disease. He believed that aging parents were a massive financial drain on successful young couples. In one email to a senior partner, Julian wrote the words that broke my heart. "The old man has nothing but a small life insurance policy. But if he gets sick, Chloe will try to drain our accounts to pay for his care. We need to secure his medical directives now, so we can limit our financial exposure when his health inevitably fails." He wanted to put me in a cheap, underfunded state-run facility the moment I got sick. He wanted to preserve his own wealth at the cost of my dignity. It was pure, icy calculation. But the hardest blow wasn't Julian's sociopathic emails. It was Chloe's text messages. Maya found the private group chat between my daughter and her fiancé. Chloe had secretly snapped a photo of my tiny living room during her last visit. She captioned it, "Can't wait to move him into assisted living next year. His poverty is so depressing to look at." Julian replied, "Just get him to sign the health proxy before the wedding. Play the concerned, loving daughter." Chloe responded with a laughing emoji. I sat in my dark apartment that night, reading those printed texts over and over until the words blurred together. I wept openly at my kitchen table. I wept for the little girl I had taught to ride a pink bicycle in Humboldt Park. I wept for the teenager who used to fall asleep on my chest while we watched old movies. That beautiful girl was dead. She had been completely replaced by a cold stranger who saw her own father as a financial liability to be neutralized. This is the major turning point in my life. This is where most normal people would break down, call their family in tears, and demand an explanation. Not me. I had a secret of my own that I had kept buried for over 2 decades. A massive, world-altering secret that they knew absolutely nothing about. For the last 3 months before the wedding, while Julian smugly thought he was playing the foolish old mechanic, I was quietly visiting my own corporate lawyer. I was rearranging massive chess pieces on a board they couldn't even see. I was setting a flawless, inescapable trap. Now, let's jump back to the night of the wedding. It was 2 in the morning. I had scrubbed my skin raw in the shower to get the smell of garbage juice off my body. I threw the rented suit into the dumpster in the alley. I was sitting at my small kitchen table, drinking a mug of black coffee in the dark. I was waiting for the inevitable. There was a frantic, heavy pounding on my apartment door. I didn't flinch. I took a slow sip of coffee. "It's open," I called out into the quiet room. Julian burst into the apartment like a hurricane. He looked completely unhinged. His expensive tuxedo bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck. His face was slick with a terrified sweat. He slammed the door behind him. "What the hell did you mean at the reception?" Julian screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "What trust?" I didn't stand up. I just casually gestured to the empty vinyl chair across from me. "Sit down, Julian. You look incredibly stressed for a man on his wedding night." Julian paced the narrow room like a caged, rabid animal. He kicked a stack of old magazines across the floor. "Don't play stupid games with me, you senile old fool," Julian snapped, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "I know everything about your pathetic finances. I've seen your bank statements. You live on a tiny union pension and social security checks. You don't have a trust." I smiled at him in the dim light. It wasn't a kind smile. "You know, Julian, you are a very thorough legal researcher. But you made one critical, fatal mistake. You assumed I was exactly what I looked like. I need to pause my story right here, because this is the moment of ultimate, beautiful satisfaction. If you are reading this, I want you to imagine the look on his face. The man who was so terrified of financial burden was about to find out he had insulted the only person who could have saved him. The tension in the room was so thick you could choke on it. I reached down and pulled a thick, heavy manila folder from under the kitchen table. I tossed it onto the worn linoleum surface. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud. Julian stopped his frantic pacing. He stared at the folder like it was a live bomb. "Open it," I commanded softly. The tone of my voice had completely changed. The meek, agreeable old mechanic was gone. This was the voice of a man who held every single card in the deck. Julian reached out with trembling, sweaty fingers. He flipped open the cardboard cover. The first page was a certified corporate registry document from the state of Illinois. Julian read the bold print at the top of the page. Arthur H. "Logistics and distribution." Julian frowned, his eyes darting back and forth. What is this nonsense? Keep reading, I said, leaning back in my chair. Julian flipped the page. It was a certified summary of corporate assets. 2 massive commercial trucking garages on the south side, a sprawling auto parts distribution warehouse in Indiana, 3 highly profitable commercial real estate parcels in Wisconsin. Julian's eyes darted frantically across the columns of numbers. His breathing hitched in his throat. When Elena got sick 10 years ago, I explained calmly, watching his world collapse. Everyone in the family thought the experimental medical bills wiped out my savings. They didn't. I had bought an empty, condemned warehouse 30 years ago for absolute pennies. I fixed it up myself. I sold it to a commercial developer for $3 million in cash. I paid for Elena's absolute best care, and I quietly invested the rest. Julian was physically shaking now. The thick parchment paper rattled violently in his hands. This financial statement says the corporate entity is valued at $8.5 million. 8.7, as of yesterday morning's market close. I corrected him gently, taking another sip of my coffee. I kept working as a mechanic because I genuinely liked the union guys. I kept this tiny apartment because it's where my wife and I shared our best memories. I didn't need a massive mansion to prove my worth. I was saving the entire empire for Chloe. Julian looked like he was going to vomit right there on my floor. The devastating realization was crashing over him in massive waves. The helpless old man he had just dumped garbage juice on was a multi-millionaire. "But you said," Julian stammered, his arrogant facade completely shattered into a million pieces. "At the wedding, you grabbed the mic and said, 'Check the trust.'" I reached into my shirt pocket, pulled out one final piece of folded paper, and slid it slowly across the table. It was a formal legal notice from the most premier wealth management firm in downtown Chicago. "I set up a massive, revocable living trust for Chloe 5 years ago," I said, my voice turning cold and hard as steel. She was going to inherit absolutely everything. The distribution business, the liquid cash, the commercial properties, all of it. Completely tax-free. I leaned forward, my elbows resting on the table, my eyes locking onto Julian's terrified face. "But then, sweet little Maya showed me your secret legal research project." Julian choked on his own breath, stumbling backward. "Maya?" "Yes, she was very, very helpful. She showed me the printed emails about forcing me into a state-run mental facility. She showed me the text messages where my own daughter laughed at my apparent poverty." I tapped the legal document with my index finger. "So, yesterday morning at 9 o'clock, I marched into my lawyer's office and I revoked the trust. I restructured my entire estate." "No," Julian whispered, tears of absolute panic welling in his wide eyes. "No, no, no. Arthur, please listen to me. We were just planning for the future. We were just being practical about healthcare costs. Look at how incredibly fast the high society bully crumbles when the power dynamic violently shifts. It is truly pathetic to witness." The man who was so terrified of financial ruin had just literally washed an $8 million fortune down the drain with a tub of dirty dishwater. I want you to remember this feeling whenever someone talks down to you. The truth always, always comes to light, and karma rarely misses a target. "The new trust," I continued relentlessly, completely ignoring Julian's desperate pleading, "leaves exactly $1,000 to Chloe. That should be just enough to buy a nice new designer dress. The remaining $8.7 million has been irrevocably transferred into an ironclad endowment for pediatric cancer research in Elena's name. The paperwork is locked. You cannot contest it in court. You cannot touch a single dime. It is permanently gone." Julian fell heavily to his knees on the cheap linoleum floor. He actually fell to his knees in his ruined tuxedo. He grabbed the edge of my kitchen table, weeping openly. "Arthur, I am begging you. The senior partners at my firm. I took out massive high-interest loans to pay for that wedding. I leveraged my personal equity to buy our new house. I thought we had a multi-million-dollar safety net coming." I stood up slowly, towering over him. I looked down at the pathetic, weeping man who had tried to steal my dignity. "You made your bed, Julian. Now you get to sleep in the trash. Get out of my apartment right now before I call the Chicago police and have you arrested for trespassing." Julian stumbled blindly out into the dark hallway, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. I locked the heavy deadbolt behind him. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel a rush of adrenaline. I just felt deeply, incredibly tired. The silent war was finally over. 4 long days later, The inevitable fallout hit my doorstep. Chloe showed up at the apartment unannounced. She didn't look anything like the glowing, radiant bride from the ballroom. She looked utterly destroyed. Her eyes were swollen and red. Her hair was a tangled mess. She banged heavily on the door, crying out for her father. I opened the door and let her step inside. Chloe collapsed immediately onto my worn sofa, burying her face in her hands. "Dad, I am so incredibly sorry. I didn't know he was going to do that at the reception. I swear to God I didn't know. Julian told me you were completely broke. He said your medical bills were going to ruin our future lives." I sat back in my armchair. I looked at my daughter, really looked at her for the first time in years, and I realized with terrifying clarity that I felt nothing. The emotional cord had been permanently severed. "You thought I was broke, so you treated me like a worthless burden. You laughed with your friends when I was publicly humiliated. You thought my lack of money gave you permission to strip away my basic human dignity." "I was stupid," Chloe wailed, reaching out desperately to grab my hand. "Please, Dad, you have to help us. Julian is screaming about a divorce. He's furious with me. We are drowning in terrible debt. Please, just call your lawyers and change the paperwork back. We're family. You love me." This right here is the ultimate moment of truth. If your own child begged for forgiveness only after finding out you had millions of dollars, could you forgive them? Could you look past the greed and pretend they loved you for who you were? I sat in that chair and weighed 30 years of memories against one moment of absolute clarity. I had already made my peace. I pulled my hand away from her grasp. "Blood doesn't make family, Chloe. Respect makes family. Unconditional loyalty makes family. You chose your husband's cruelty over my unconditional love. I genuinely wish you the best in your life, but you are not my responsibility anymore." I calmly asked her to leave. She cried hysterically. She begged on her knees. But eventually, when she realized the tears wouldn't unlock the vault, the sadness turned to cold anger, and she walked out the door. I watched her drive away from the living room window. I pulled the blinds shut, blocking out the city. This brutal experience taught me a profound lesson about the true nature of human value. The massive mistake most people make in life is believing that their self-worth is somehow tied to their bank account, or that setting strict boundaries with toxic family members is a selfish sin. What I understood, that nobody else in that ballroom did, was that true power isn't about flashing your wealth or destroying your enemies with violence. True power is having the absolute strength to walk away from people who only love you for what they can extract from you. 6 months after the wedding, I finalized the sale of the Chicago logistics business. I packed up my few humble belongings, left the city behind, and moved to a quiet, beautiful log cabin near a massive lake in northern Michigan. I didn't keep my wealth a dark secret anymore, but I certainly didn't flaunt it either. I used a large portion of the money to fund a free legal aid clinic in town. We specifically help elderly folks in rural areas fight back against financial exploitation from their greedy relatives. Maya even moved up here to run the office for me. I spend my early mornings drinking coffee on the porch. I spend my afternoons fishing on the quiet lake. I spend my evenings reading good books by the fire. I never answered any of Chloe's desperate voicemails. Through the grapevine, I heard she ended up completely bankrupt, divorced, and working a terrible retail job to slowly pay off Julian's disastrous, leveraged debts. Julian was unceremoniously fired from his private equity firm when the dark rumors of his failed elder abuse scheme leaked to the senior partners. His reputation was entirely ruined. I sleep soundly every single night, knowing I defended my own honor and protected the legacy of my late wife. I lost a daughter, but I saved my own soul. This brutal experience taught me that true family is built on mutual respect, never just shared blood. The mistake most people make is believing that their self-worth is tied to their bank account, or that setting strict boundaries with toxic relatives is somehow a selfish sin. It is not. What I understood that nobody else in that ballroom did was that true power isn't about flashing your wealth or destroying your enemies. True power is walking away. If there is one thing you take away from my life, let it be this specific action you can take today. Audit your inner circle right now. Look closely at the people sitting at your dinner table and ask yourself if they would still be there if you had absolutely nothing to offer them but your presence. If the answer is no, show them the door. Sit with this question tonight. Are you shrinking your own personality and sacrificing your dignity just to make someone else comfortable? I want to hear from you now, because these conversations truly matter. Drop a 1 in the comments if you think I was absolutely right to cut Chloe off completely. Drop a 2 if you think I should have left her a little more money to survive the divorce. Or drop a 3 if you genuinely believe families should always be forgiven, no matter the betrayal. Let me know where in the world you are watching from, and tell me what time it is there right now. Have you ever experienced a heartbreaking betrayal from someone you deeply trusted? Please share your story down below, because reading your experiences helps me remember I did the right thing. If my journey resonated with you today, please hit that subscribe button and join our community for more stories about justice, setting boundaries, and finding your strength. Protect your peace. This is a fictional story inspired by real emotional experiences, fully rewritten and reimagined in Chicago to create original content. Any resemblance to real people or events is coincidental.